Hello and welcome to our fourth episode of Season 3 of Legal Wellbeing in Action. Today's episode, Service to the Community, a Wellspring of Wellbeing, is another installment of this year's theme, Wellbeing, a Deeper Dive. For this episode, we are joined by the United States Attorney for the District of New Mexico, Alexander Uballez, and Asia Brooks, Executive Assistant United States Attorney for the District of New Mexico and the current Secretary-Treasurer for the State Bar of New Mexico Board of Bar Commissioners. In this episode, while Mr. Uballez and Ms. Brooks consider traditional notions of surface and internal well-being, they go beyond to explore the concept of community service as a cornerstone of well-being. They talk about the importance of following one's core values, facing challenges, expressing gratitude, and maintaining a sense of humanity in the midst of working in a demanding, dramatic, and tragic-filled environment, but likewise focus on the importance of serving one's community to develop and sustain a source of pride, fulfillment, purpose, and ultimately well-being. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bill, for that introduction and for inviting the U.S. Attorney's Office to be a part of the Legal Wellbeing in Action podcast. As Bill said, my name is Asia Brooks, and I'm the Executive Assistant United States Attorney for the District of New Mexico. I'm also the current Secretary-Treasurer for the State Bar of New Mexico. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with our United States Attorney for the District of New Mexico, Alexander Uballez. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining me. We're going to be taking a deeper dive into the topic of wellness and how we incorporate it into our lives and into our profession.
My pleasure.
We're
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. We're also going to be talking about how we are working towards well-being because, no one is perfect. And so also in the ways that we are working toward our efforts at wellness. So to kick it off, let's learn a little bit about you. Can you please just tell us your story?
I never saw myself as someone who would be a lawyer. And I struggled with the concept of being a lawyer throughout law school heavily. And so what really has led me here has been a series of mistakes and decisions that weren't well thought through, but that propelled me in the right direction, I feel like, because every decision I made was for a reason tied to one of my core values, which is what makes a lot of sense for me in reflecting on wellness and my role in leading an office in wellness and, my life and my professional career. And so I think, me and you, Asia, have talked about this in the past, is, anyone that knows me knows that I am the last person you think of for traditional wellness. And I see wellness in reflection broken down into three different areas. I see there's sort of like body or surface wellness, which is the wellness we hear about frequently, and taking care of yourself, getting sleep, feeding yourself. And then internal wellness, which is what I understand this season of the podcast to reflect on, which is more bringing into congruence what is inside of you and the things that you do in your life. And I tie those two things, I said there's three, because I tie those two things very heavily to relationship to community and others. And that's because I see human beings as social creatures fundamentally. And I think that's why we as lawyers really suffer from disproportionate rates of substance abuse and depression and suicide. And it's not because we have the hardest job. It's not because we carry the most stress or even have the most on the line. I mean, there's folks in the military, there's heavy equipment operators, there's bus drivers who have dozens and dozens of people's lives in their hands every single day. Our job's uniquely hard because as lawyers, we are asked to put aside our basic need for community to represent a certain interest. And I think that produces a certain amount of cognitive dissonance. And so it was a thing I didn't realize. And so to get back to your question, which is, I didn't realize this about lawyers before because I'm the first and only lawyer in my family. My mom's an immigrant. My dad is a high school graduate from East LA. And so I didn't really know what lawyers did before I got to law school. But I did, when I got there, know myself pretty well. And so what I knew about myself was that I have an inability of bridging the cognitive dissonance between the values and the commitment I have to community and the representation of a sole client or a single client to the exclusion of all others. And so I made a choice, and the choice was, how do I use this law degree to serve my community? And it came down to, in a very meaningful and a real way, my 1L summer, when I was faced with a very privileged choice between summer jobs. One was to make $30,000 for 10 weeks of work at a large law firm, and the other was to come here and work for the New Mexico Attorney General's office. Now, I made the decision did not make financial sense. $30,000 was about the same amount that my wife made in an entire year. And we were living in New York together at the time. But the decision to serve the public came easy for me. And so to circle all the way back to your question, what is my story? And how did I get here? Nobody becomes the chief federal law enforcement officer of the District of New Mexico at age 36 by getting 8 hours of sleep a night, by eating 3 meals a day, by exercising 5 days a week, by taking vacation. But I'm here really because of internal congruence with my external behavior. And so I'm here because I picked a job that represented the community. And I lived every day in furtherance of that, as if I wouldn't have a tomorrow.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And it kind of allows me to understand a little more about like how you carry this heavy load, because as you mentioned, you know, you're the chief federal law enforcement officer in the state, as well as being a lawyer, which already it sounds like has a little bit of cognitive dissonance for you already, right? And so, you know, this is a big deal. Your job as the United States Attorney for the District of New Mexico for our entire state comes with an immense amount of pressure. And I understand that your work with community and the way that this position is community oriented and serves the public helps you kind of to reduce that dissonance. But what are the other things that kind of keep you motivated? Because with this job, you're juggling so many things. You are running an entire office of, you know, almost 200 employees, and also trying to keep the public safe. So if you could tell us what your top 5 core values are in this job that keeps you going and keeps you motivated.
What keeps me motivated is a little different than my core values, because it's what keeps me motivated is knowing that there is an end, right? The most special thing about being alive really is knowing that it is a fleeting joy for each one of us. And so what keeps me motivated is knowing that that none of us are promised more than today, more than this moment, in fact. And knowing that with that period, with the end coming, right, whether it's tomorrow or in 40 years, I have to use every moment that I have to achieve as much as I can for others. And so I couldn't come up, so for top values, it has to be service as one. Service as it relates to community undergirds everything that I do and every choice that I make. Excellence is another one. It's more of a personal value that I expect out of myself and out of everyone around me. Excellence. I expect perfection, which doesn't mean, right, that people get punished when they're not perfect. But it means that we should all strive for that at all times, and we should be our best, especially when we represent the United States especially when we represent tax dollars. We want to give the public, we want to give taxpayers, every penny that they invest in us and more. We want to be a great investment and show that and demonstrate that every day in what we do. And the final one that really is resonant for me is persistence. It's never giving up in the face of odds stacked against us. It's persisting through the huge balls of red tape that exist in the federal government. It is looking at huge intractable problems and breaking them down into pieces and tackling the pieces one by one, knowing that each step we take is a step closer to our goal.
Well, those are great values. And I think you gave me 3, which is fine. I'll take 3 instead of 5. But I want to kind of focus.
I'm not good at rules.
I know. I should know this by now. I should know this. I want to focus on your second core value that you mentioned, which is excellence, right? And striving for the best, which doesn't necessarily mean always achieving what we strive for, but at least trying to do that, right? And I know that, sometimes for me, and many times I think for most people, you might have this little voice in your head that can be like either a little angel or like a little devil, right? And so I know in the wellness community these days, there's a big emphasis on affirmations. I'm sure you probably know what these are, but, repeating like positive statements to yourself, trying to kind of like get that little devil to stop talking so loudly, right? And so like repeating things about yourself that are good, so that you internalize them. And so I appreciate affirmations. My uncle actually has an affirmation deck of cards, and it has an affirmation for each day. And so he sends me a text message with an affirmation each day, which is like extremely helpful. It's so awesome. My personal way of like giving myself affirmations is through music. So like if I do something big, if I'm like getting ready for something big or getting ready for like a presentation or getting ready for something where I'm supposed to be excellent and my best, I'll listen to something that kind of gets me like pumped up, right? And so I wanted to, make things a little more fun and wanted to know if you have an affirmation song. So if you have a song that you listen to like before you have something really, really big that you're about to do, that kind of gets you like ready.
So I did, and then Tanessa ruined it for me by telling me not to cuss. And so I have to figure out a different option that's radio friendly. I have a really interesting relationship with music. I get bored incredibly easily, which means I rarely listen to songs for more than a month or two. And if I don't have a playlist that is substantially songs within the last 6 months, I don't get excited about it anymore. So the song I was going to tell you is a recent release by Key Glock, the title of which I will not say. But another one that I think really does, it has in the past driven me, I think both philosophically and when I'm trying to get myself into the right mindset, is Young Forever by Jay-Z. And
nice.
I like both the way in which he combines impermanence, the impermanence of youth, contrasting with his career and its tie to youth, and as well as how his legend lives beyond the things he does today, through the things he does for others, and through the storytelling about what he has done. And so that really speaks to me. I'm a big Jay-Z fan. You won't be able to see the video, but I have a Basquiat behind me that's referenced heavily by Jay-Z, which in his kings get their heads cut off. And so those are a real source of inspiration, I would say, for me.
I know who Jay-Z is, so that's a really good thing. We have that in common. I am very different than you. I listen to music for years. I will incorporate a new song like once a year, maybe. And so that's why I know who Jay-Z is, but I don't know who the first person you mentioned was at all. But my list,
I'll get you a playlist,
Beyonce.
Asia.
Okay, give me a playlist of like the new stuff, right? My playlist is like Prince, Michael Jackson, like all these old school folks. But Beyonce's on my list. She has some new stuff, so she's one of those who's old but also new. I have some Lizzo on there, and so they kind of really get me ready. And I even have Megan Thee Stallion on there, so she's like one of my newer
stuff.
There's new stuff. She's one of my newer people.
I'm huge fans of them. They are on the playlist regularly.
Yeah, they're like the hype team. So
yes.
So getting back to kind of that little voice that we were talking about, we have like the angel voice and the little devil voice. So do you have any positive or negative internal voices that either help you, like with our affirmations, or hinder you? And if you do have any negative voices, do you have tips on like overcoming those negative voices?
I do have many voices in my head. I have, and they are constantly yelling at each other. And I think so, but I have one primary negative internal voice, and then one persistent positive one, and one that sort of I can't classify as either, maybe bridges the two. And so my negative one is that I seek perfection, as I said before. This morning when I woke up, right, and every other single morning, my first feeling is frustration that I did not wake up earlier. My last thoughts every night is frustration that I can't stay up later and keep going. And so I drive myself absolutely relentlessly. And related to that, I have a very hard time forgiving myself, which is the answer to the next question. Learning to forgive myself is the biggest thing I've tried to do to counter that negative voice. My positive voice is incredibly positive, and it relates to the fact that I'm very superstitious, or maybe religious or spiritual. I believe in luck. I believe in fortune. I believe in fate. I believe also that each of these things for me are tied to service. And so as long as I am doing good, I feel that I've been carried forward almost, against my will into success. And the numbers sort of bear this out, because the odds that a person like me would end up in the position that I'm in are pretty much zero, right? 90%, nearly 90% of federal defendants are male, 50% are Latino, and the average age is 37, meaning I am the average federal defendant, meaning it is 100% more likely that I will end up on the other side of the verses than the one that I have. And so, despite the odds, I have found myself here. And I let myself keep that success as evidence that what I'm doing and how I'm doing it is right and is meaningful. And so the final sort of bridge between the two, I'm incapable of managing cognitive dissonance. And so to put it a different way, my internal monologues, the ones I just described, drive my every action. I'm not capable of acting contrary to them. And so that's the third overlaying monologue that keeps the other two, in check, which is, and I guess keeps my actions in check, which is I will always do the thing I would make the best decision to do the thing that's most right in every instance.
Yeah. Well, I think the seeking perfection kind of relates back to your core value of excellence, which, is, I think seeking perfection is a kind of trying to be excellent, right? The not forgiving yourself part is the difficult, right?
More
like
toxic,
negative
yes.
piece of that, right? And so, sometimes we think of these things in a vacuum. And so like in the perfect world, we have these voices and, whatever they may be, whatever they may tell us, right? At the same time, we have our lives and what's happening to us every day. And so like, sometimes there are things that are just like out of our control, right? We're all human. We all live, we die, as you mentioned, and we try to be our best selves in between, but sometimes really awful things happen, right? And so to reference a Beyonce song, which I am glad that I get to mention Beyonce twice in a podcast, when life gives you lemons, how do you make lemonade? And for those of you who do not know, Lemonade is a title of one of Beyonce's albums. So I know that saying was out before her, but bringing it back to Beyonce again, when really awful things happen, how do you kind of navigate that fear and that anxiety and that stress that's pretty much inevitable?
It's a really good question. And I believe in and I love the job that I have as a prosecutor, and all I have done, in my career is criminal prosecution. And as I've described, it vindicates me in a way of my approach to the world. I feel like I'm doing the right thing. I think I'm serving community. But this job is fear, anxiety, and stress. It embodies it. Right. So victory in court, for example, is only ever vindicating a loss. It's bringing a feeling of justice to a grieving family. But no victory has ever brought me joy, only relief. Right. And so anxiety and stress are the baseline. The 35 or so felony jury trials that I have conducted, the vast majority of them were crimes against children, either sexual abuse or physical abuse. 3 of them were child homicide cases. And during my career at the district attorney's office, I secured 3 life convictions against individuals who killed children. And none of those brought joy. I felt good about my work. I felt proud of what we accomplished. I felt momentary relief. But anxiety and stress, for me, are the constant in a world where there is so much darkness. And to bring it back, unfortunately, over and over to my main line, I relieve it by doing more to make the world a better place, to bring lights to the darkness, to serve community and give them something to hope and believe in. And only through practical steps, only through putting my hands on something, do I relieve that anxiety and that stress.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up this kind of conundrum within, I think, the criminal justice system generally of winning, but is it really a victory? Is it really something to celebrate, right? Because we're talking about society, putting someone who's done something really bad in jail is also putting someone's, son in jail and someone's father in jail potentially, right?
Yes.
And so there's this very difficult tension in the work that most attorneys do, because most of the time there's some sort of conflict there. There's some sort of pull and push, right? And so you mentioned you mentioned joy, so I'm actually going to like skip around a little bit, but I'm going to ask you, what daily things do you do? It could be small or it could be big. What do you do that help you maintain your sense of well-being? But more importantly, what do you do that brings you joy? Like for me, you know, I love to eat delicious food. I don't know if that's wellness really. I guess it could be either. You could see it either way.
I think it counts, Asia. I think it counts.
But I also like to make like a nice cup of tea every morning. You know, no matter what I'm doing, I will boil my water. I will get my tea leaves. I'll put them, you know, I'll do the whole thing. It calms me down. And so do you have anything like that you do? Like I said, it could be something as small as that or something really big that you do that brings you joy and that helps you kind of stay sane.
It's very zen, Asia. I really need to get more into tea. It's like a nice process. I have a similar and analogous process with coffee. I drink coffee, as you know, religiously and throughout the day. And so I do a similar thing every morning. The first thing I do is get the coffee ready.
I'm seeing a very disturbing trend here because I think this also like ties into your seeking perfection and excellence. Like the caffeine part of this is kind of speaking to that a little bit.
Without a doubt. But it also brings me comfort. I drink my coffee black.
That's important. It could be both.
And it just, it keeps me in line. No, it really is a part of my morning routine. And I would say I have a routine. I don't know that it brings me joy, but maybe it's sort of in the Zen sense of your preparing of tea keeps me sane. You know, and so I have, you know, I wake up, I shouldn't say I wake up. When the dog wakes me up around 4:30 every morning, the dog wants to go out. And so that's usually around the time I get up. I do a couple hours, I do coffee first. I do a couple hours of work and then the kids get up at 7. And so then the next 2 hours are dedicated to getting the kids ready. It's packing lunches, it's feeding them breakfast, it's getting them dressed, it's doing their hair. So I have 2 girls and a boy, and I love doing my girls' hair in the morning when I have time. And then I take them to school. And so that's a part of my routine that I really treasure, and spending that time with them every day in that way is very meaningful to me. And the back end of the day when I get home, you know, I do my wife is the cook. She is a phenomenal cook. And it's sadly, I mean, I enjoy good food, but I feel like it's sadly wasted on me. But she'll cook the dinner. And then I usually do the bedtime routine with them. I get them to brush their teeth, get them in their pajamas. I usually read a book to them when they fall asleep. And they like me, I think this is a genetic thing, they like me don't sleep very much, which is not great for my work-life balance, because it means by the time they're in bed and asleep, it's around 10 o'clock at night. And so that's when if I still have the energy, I'll open the computer back up and I'll try to get some stuff done. But having those spaces in my life on a daily basis where I spend time with my children in a meaningful way, and knowing that I'm going to do it for those hours. I'm not going to be on my email. I'm not going to be working, you know, answering calls, and people know when they're calling during those times I'm not answering my phone. It's because I'm giving them my full attention. And so that I would say that is a thing that brings me joy.
Nice. Well, let's continue talking about this. Let's expound on this. I like the joy part of this conversation. And it's kind of hilarious that doing your kid's hair brings you joy, because it brings me sadness, because my child hates for me to do anything to his hair. And it's always a fight. There's always crying. There's always running. There's always chasing that happens. And so I live for the day that will bring me joy. maybe there'll be like a mindset change at some point, but right now there's no fun in doing the hair. And you mentioned your children, so you have 3 kids. under the age of 10, which I think is insane, but amazing.
Yes.
Because when I see people who can have multiple children, I'm like, wow, I don't even know. Like, it's just amazing to me. And so in the same vein that we just talked about the joy, that they bring you, and that, some of this routine that you have with them brings you, has your idea of well-being changed since you became a dad? And if not, why? If yes, how?
My idea of well-being has not changed, but I would say that the definition, the target population has expanded, right? So it's always been oriented towards others and helping community. And, my kids are part of others in the community, and they are also a future, all of our children collectively. As I had mentioned before, my work with the DA's office, and actually throughout my career, has been largely focused on crimes against children. And I love spending time with kids. Teenagers, as long as they're not yours, are the most amazing little human beings in the world. They're incredible, and they're fun, and they're insightful, and they're full of hope. And so and that has been a through line in my career. I was very lucky during the time when I was doing, those back-to-back trials in the district attorney's office to be married to a wonderful woman who ran the arts education nonprofit down here in Albuquerque, and served middle school and high school age kids, and getting there after work and helping those kids and working with those kids and learning from those kids was one of the most amazing and sort of offsetting experiences for the darkness that I lived in, during the workday. And so I've always had that feeling. And so since becoming a father, it's been, as I described, carving out time to spend with them. It's being intentional about it because the time that I have with them is really so limited. And this sort of ties into a broader theme for me, which is I don't believe, at least in this era of my life, I don't believe in balance. I don't think balance is a thing that exists. I believe in trade-offs, right? So as United States Attorney, a presidential appointee, it is likely that the next few years, as I sit in this seat and run this office and serve this community, that these years may constitute my greatest contribution to the world. This may be the biggest opportunity I have in my life to make change for the broadest segment of people. But at the same time, right, with 3 kids, and they're 6 and under, in fact, I'm also cognizant that this is the most magical time in their lives, and the age at which my relationship with them will be the strongest and the closest that it will ever be. And so I have to balance these 2 things that are both true, and they're both values, and they both matter a lot to me. And I can't. There aren't enough hours in the day to balance them, right? And so then it's a matter of when do I trade off between these 2 things? How do I make my time the most meaningful as I can? Knowing these 2 truths that are conflicting and the way against each other.
Yeah. Well, and it all kind of ties into your sense of community, and your trade-offs involve society at large, right? Like the public, and also society meaning like your children and your family, right? And so both of those segments of people are important, and both are equally important, I would argue. I would actually argue the children are probably more important, which I don't know if that's controversial or not, but I'm going to ask you a question about like you. And so like, because you're not in, like, you're the person who is doing some work in both of those situations, but is there ever a time that you like are just I guess, giving yourself some grace and giving yourself some space and doing things that like you want to do, right? Like doing things for others is really wonderful. And it sounds like that's kind of like your love language, I guess, but also like, is there any part of you right now, where your wellness and your, like you yourself, are able to be a part of that conversation of the society, I guess, of the community?
No. It's hard, right? So when I was saying, like, I lack that ability to rationalize and to explain why that would be a thing that matters to me, right? I need, and like, I'm, again, my toughest critic. I am the hardest on myself. I know it's a thing I need to confront and deal with. But I can never, when confronted with a choice, and it's always a choice of where to dedicate your time, your energy, and resources, like, the way I take care of myself is by proving to myself that I'm doing the best that I can for others at any given moment.
Okay. Yeah, and I want you to tell everyone listening your inspirational quote. That was one of the questions. And we almost took it off the list because I was like, I don't know if we should talk about that. But actually, I think we should. I think your quote actually gives a lot of perspective to your ideas on the world. And so tell them about your quote.
So, it's a quote by Sandra Cisneros that has really stuck with me throughout my life and has always felt and resonated with me and how I orient myself to the world. And so the quote is this: it's, "We do this because the world that we live in is a house on fire, and the people that we love are burning."
So that is an inspirational quote for you, which is good. And it, like I said, I think it also gives a little bit of insight into, your answer about why you are the doer in many of these scenarios, but you are not the recipient of a traditional sense of wellness, I guess. And so, I wonder, my favorite quote is by Maya Angelou. It's similarly community oriented, I think. And it is, when you learn, teach, when you get, give, right? And so like kind of this sense of like giving back to community. I will also say that I love myself a lot. And
I love you too.
If I ever get,
You're wonderful.
I know, you're good. You're good with giving. We're trying to learn how to receive, right? We're trying to learn how to receive. So I'm a good recipient. And like all these traditional notions of wellness, right? And I've actually been reading up on wellness and just some really interesting ideas about wellness as not like bubble baths and, going to the spa and eating healthy, but like this notion of wellness as boundaries and being able to do something nice for yourself and, kind of these larger type conversations that we have maybe with our internal voice, and then putting those into action, right? And so it's definitely been a learning experience for me, but I am older than you, so I can say this. I think with time, you might have to start giving yourself some love and attention. That's just my opinion, but we'll see. We'll see what time brings us.
And this is certainly an era, right? I mean, so the things to keep in mind that I always do, right, is this position is temporary, right? So with the changing of the guard, it's not promised, but near certain I will be fired. And at that point, and there will be a point too where my children are don't want to hang out with me anymore, right? And so this time in my life is unique, and it feels time bounded. And it is not a time for balance, but it is a time to trade off, right? It's a time to lean in to what I have right now. And maybe there'll be a time in the not too distant future where I'm unemployed and my kids don't want to hang out with me. And, I'll have plenty of time to do things that I think that I would love. I have, as you know, Asia, and as everyone who's listening will soon know, Asia's husband is my source of supply for bees. Her husband's a beekeeper, and he got me into beekeeping. I love doing it. I don't have the time to do it. I got in a hive and snuck it into our house around my wife late at night because that's the time that I get home. And they prospered and they did wonderfully, and the kids loved them. And then they got too big for their hive and they swarmed and they left. And I had to say goodbye to them. And maybe in my future, when I'm unemployed and my kids are in high school, I will have time to be a beekeeper.
Yay. Yeah, no, that sounds very healthy. That sounds very, very, very you. And, my husband's beekeeping right now. So I think we both have he and I both have a very healthy sense of self. And I had to get on board with the bees. I was like, okay to the bees, no to the chickens for now, but okay to the bees.
Chickens.
I had to give him one or the other. So you have chickens. So see, we're good. One or the other. And so we're nearing the end of our conversation. And so before we go, I want to get two really good questions in. And so one of them relates to our office's efforts regarding wellness. And so I just want to chat with you a little bit about some ways that our office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, is incorporating wellness into our practices.
Sure. And I'm actually going to flip this one back on you, but I'll do a little talk first about it, because wellness is a huge priority for me, despite everything that you've heard me say today. I really see how important it is, having lived in this world for the last decade. And so while I don't feel prosecutors suffer from the same cognitive dissonance that really drives most lawyers into depression, we do bear witness to some of the darkest events and moments in our community, and we do it on a consistent basis. In our job, we live in the dark frequently, and we are those who are there to experience the worst of what society has. And so I know that this is a recipe for burnout for the folks who work for me. I've seen it happen to very good people, and I see the stress bear down on those who carry these very heavy loads. And so the best way for me to incorporate wellness into our office is to prioritize community. And that's not the same as prioritizing service to the community. I'm not here just driving people work harder. That's how you're going to feel better. That only works with me. I want to prioritize the community amongst the people in the office. And so it is my relationship with my colleagues, with my friends here with whom I've experienced untold trauma that has carried me through that trauma. And so at a baseline, we strive here, and one of the things Asia does in this office is help me build that community. And it's from small things like food at events. It's small things like celebrating cultures when they're through food, through presentations, through exchanges. And it is more things on point, like wellness trainings and access to resources. And for me, it is realizing that a part of my job as a leader is not just to approve the budget sheets and the time off, and to administer, not just to set vision and lead policy direction, but to be involved in the lives of my employees in the way that my friends and colleagues have been involved in mine, to give them the support in a very practical, person-to-person, relationship sense that'll build the community here, that'll support them through the darkest hours of their jobs and the lives of those in our community. But I do want to flip the question back on you, Asia, because that's a large part of your portfolio here. And so what are the things the U.S. Attorney's Office is incorporating to bring wellness into our practice?
Well, I think I was really lucky when I came on board because there was already a really great sense of community here. And, there were already gatherings happening. There were already, going to baseball games and to soccer games and, and having, celebrations for birthdays and things like that. So I think that was something that I really appreciated coming in to the office. And, before I came in, there was already talk about wellness. And so one of our attorneys, Shayna Long, and another attorney, Terry Abernathy, helped put on a wellness training back at the end of 2022. And I know Pamela Moore from the State Bar was involved in that, along with some attorneys in the community, attorneys from our office, and also attorneys from our executive office. And so we're going to have another follow-up training on secondary trauma coming up this summer. And so just making sure that, we have the tools and we're learning about some of the ways that we can really tackle some of these issues. And I think just making sure that is something that is institutionalized, right? That we're doing this moving forward. There's a wellness committee now, which is going to be very helpful in doing some of the things that you mentioned, making sure that we are celebrating, Administrative Professionals Day, which we just did, and, bring your kid to work day. So these events where we have this sense of community, I think is really important. And also just like the tools, the things that you learn in training of how to deal with sensitive subject matter and not internalize it. So I think we're doing a good job. I think we will keep, moving forward and growing in this area. And before we go, I know we're at time, but right at the end, can you describe your life in a 6-word sentence?
I had a couple options here, but I'm calling an audible and changing at the last minute to reflect a lyric from the song I identified earlier, which is, "Do you really want to live forever?"
Oh, okay. That's good. I like it. You're bringing it full circle. You started with Jay-Z and you're ending with Jay-Z.
Yes, ma'am.
Which I appreciate because I know who Jay-Z is. So, I think that's a perfect way to end. And so I want to just say thank you again to Alex Uballez, the U.S. Attorney, for speaking with me. And thank you to everyone who's listening. We are so excited to have been invited to do this. And we hope that you will tune in to the next episode of Legal Wellbeing in Action. And, where there will be another deep dive into issues of wellness. So thank you for listening, and we hope that you will tune in next month.
Thank you so much, Asia. Love being on the show.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar